Okay. Today, my guest is Professor Pierre Dussauge. I will keep my introduction short to maximize our time with him. In the next 30 minutes or so, we'll talk about Pierre as a person. Professor Dussauge is a thought leader and an esteemed scholar, and finally as a mentor to many PhD students and junior faculty. For the sake of time, I'll skip many of his accomplishments and give you a very quick snapshot. Professor Dussauge is an expert in strategic alliances and an active member of the SMS, the AOM, and the European Management Association. He has served as the editor-in-chief of European Management Review and sits on the board of several top journals in the field. He has received or was nominated for Best Paper Awards at SMS. He is the author or co-author of several books in management, strategic technology management, and alliances. His 1995 book received the McKinsey Award for Best Management Book published in France. Thank you, Pierre, for joining us.
Thank you for having me with you.
Pierre, let's start with your early beginnings. What did you want to become when you were a child?
Well, this may sound very strange and politically incorrect, but I wanted to become a bullfighter, believe it or not. When I was a child, I used to drive through Spain with my parents a lot. And my parents would leave me in their hotel room. I guess they'd probably go to jail for that today. And while I waited for them in the hotel room, I felt very jealous that I couldn't go to bullfights, but I saw pictures I could see on TV. And I thought this looked like the best job in the world. Obviously, I'm glad I didn't pick that. I probably wouldn't be here anymore, but still.
And this is actually quite funny. So where did you grow up? In Spain?
No, I grew up in Tangiers in Morocco.
Okay.
So my parents met in Morocco. They arrived there by chance, both of them, sort of separately. And I guess they produced me somewhere along the way.
Interesting. Okay. I normally ask, when can you remember the first moment of difference between domestic and international?
You should.
Okay.
That's it.
When is the earliest moment of awareness between domestic and international?
Well, actually, I'd like to turn the question around.
Okay. Because
my understanding was that everything was very multinational from the start. So sort of domestic or country of origin was a very remote notion. Because I was born and grew up in Tangiers, and Tangiers was an international zone. So actually it was run by a consortium of countries. I don't remember exactly which, but the US, Russia, or the Soviet Union, I should say, Britain, Spain, France, and a few others. And it was, I guess I took this for granted that, you met people, and some people were of Italian origin, some people were of French origin. There were Moroccans, of course, but a lot of the Moroccans in Tangiers didn't really speak Arabic because they spoke Berber rather than Arabic. And they spoke a lot of Spanish because Tangiers was sort of a part of the Spanish protectorate on the north of Morocco. So it was a very, very global setting at the beginning, and everyone sort of talked of their country of origin as though it were some very distant, remote place without really knowing what it was like. And I guess that's my first understanding of different nationalities and places to live.
Very interesting. Pierre, how did you choose academia?
I didn't choose. Academia chose me. The French, so my mother was American and my father was French. So I did my very early schooling in the US system in Tangiers. And then I don't know exactly why, but I think the French school was considered to be sort of slightly better. I was moved into the French system. And the French system is very sort of elitist in some ways, and I don't mean this to be necessarily very good, but it sort of takes you to your limit and pushes you through the system. And in particular, they have these sort of so-called elite schools called Grande Ecole. And I went to one where I have worked for the past almost 40 years, which is HEC.
Mhm.
And I didn't even know what a company was. I had no idea what management was, but sort of my grades in high school made me the perfect candidate to enter this particular school rather than engineering or something else, where I guess my skills would have had to been slightly different. And when I finished HEC, in those days there was military service in France, which I didn't feel very attracted by, or an alternative which you could do twice the length, but you had to do it abroad. It was a sort of a Peace Corps type thing. And I happened to be sent to Mexico. And it was on a job where it was to help in the collaboration between the faculty of HEC and a Mexican university. And I got to know a lot of faculty while I was there. I sort of served them as a, I guess, factotum / tourist guide / I would help in anything. But when I came back to France after my 2 years in Mexico, I thought I would find a normal manager's job, just the norm. And I was asked if I wanted to be a TA, RA for one of the faculty that I'd met while I was in Mexico, and just as a short-term job, waiting to get a real job. And I guess I did I was there for a while, found it interesting, and thought, this looks pretty cool. Why not try this? And then they told me, oh, but there's a slight problem. If you want to get a job here, you need to get a PhD first.
Mm.
So then I scratched my head and sort of thought if I went away, I wouldn't get my job would be given to someone else. So I decided to get a PhD in Paris and kept on to my it was an assistant job at the beginning and slowly turned into a faculty job. In those days, there was no formal hiring process. There was no tenure track. It was a very, very strange environment. And so I guess I just ended up there. My only contact with academia is that my father was a university literature professor. And his dissertation was on Hemingway, believe it or not. But I had no particular interest in becoming a management or a business academic. I just sort of ended up there by chance, but I can't say I regret it. On the contrary, I'm pretty happy.
I mean, Hemingway wrote all about it. The bullfighter, the short stories,
Yes.
the 25 minutes, little cigars.
Yes.
Super interesting. Okay. Something that is not on your CV that people will find interesting on top of everything that you just explained.
Well, I have an interest in, I was going to say collecting. It's not really collecting. I'm interested in strange objects. So I like to go to auction sales, and I buy what most of the people around me find very strange. But on the piece of furniture right across from me here, there is a marble skull, which supposedly is 17th century Italian. And I have some Mayan eccentrics, which most people probably don't know what they are, but they're carved pieces of chert. And they're called eccentrics because they were carved to be as complicated and difficult to make as possible, but had no use whatsoever. And so I like going to auction sales. And I went once with a friend who's a gambler, and he said, oh, this feels very much like a casino. So I guess I get the same kind of thrills out of bidding as maybe some people do out of a casino. I'm not a gambler. I'm too risk averse, but still.
Do you sell the stuff you buy, or you just keep
Well,
accumulating?
I'm not very good at selling. I just keep it. And so I have way too much. And I'm afraid that when my kids have to dispose of it, it's going to be a complicated task for them. But their bad luck, not mine. But I enjoy it. I like to go back and look at what I have. And I like to think of it as a cabinet of curiosities, which was something that between the 16th and the 19th century was very fashionable in Europe.
Where do you find the auction houses? Like, where is the auction? Like, how do you find them?
Well, now they're more and more online, but there's I guess it's a profession. They're like Christie's is an auction house, Sotheby's is an auction house, and they have their own premises. And it's much more fun going on site than doing it online, because there is an adrenaline rush. So you can spend thousands of dollars in a few seconds, literally, and some people literally spend millions of dollars, but I'm not in that league.
Perfect. Regrets? Have you got any regrets?
Yes, I think. Well, I would have liked to be an archaeologist. I love going to old ruins, if possible in remote places that are little explored. And I think my dream would have been being Howard Carter and finding Tutankhamun's tomb or something similar, or Hiram Bingham and Machu Picchu, something like that. I love this idea of lost cities and sort of remote places.
I normally ask what's the biggest failure and what you learn from it. What did you learn from your biggest failure?
Well, I don't know if it's my biggest failure, but it's at least a professional failure. I feel embarrassed in hindsight. When I got my first sabbatical, I thought it would be a good idea to go to the US, just because I guess the US in those days, this was in the 80s, so it was a long time ago, was seen as sort of the Mecca of, a religion's comment, but sorry about that. Or the Jerusalem of management and business in general. And I spent one semester at Michigan and one semester at NYU. And very kindly, the people at NYU asked me if I wanted to give a research presentation. And I went to talk about what I was working on. And I could see on their faces that something was not right. And I think that what we used to call research in Europe in those days was not seen as sort of legitimate research in US business schools. And I hadn't figured that out. And I think actually it was extremely helpful, because it made me understand sort of how academia can be many different sort of things. And I don't necessarily rank order it in terms of value, but I do think that sort of more positivistic research, where you test hypotheses and so on, I sort of figured out through that somewhat embarrassing and slightly traumatic event. And luckily, I guess I was early on, I became aware of this, and I was among the first with a handful of colleagues at HEC who started trying to publish in, what we would call academic journals today. Whereas the style of the house, but like at many places, it was the same at Bocconi, it was the same in many business schools throughout Europe. Your sort of the thing to do was to write books. And sometimes it could be textbooks, sometimes it was more sort of in, I don't know, sort of points of view type books, or books with a kind of thesis, but that would clearly not fit what we call research today. And I think becoming aware of that early enough in my career was extremely helpful and sort of has helped me ever since.
It's actually one of the questions I normally ask about how did the field evolve over time, and we're talking about 40 years. Like we're talking about a 40-year evolution.
Well, unfortunately, I have a long career behind me, but
some European schools and some Scandinavian schools, especially like the Danish or the Stockholm maybe school, they did really make a switch very early on, right? I think they were one of the early ones. Why do you think this change happened? Why is the difference between the European style of research and the American style of research so different?
So, I mean, I think at least in social, I think the picture would be very different in hard sciences, but in I don't know, physics or chemistry or in math, actually. Now, I'm not sure what research in math really is. I wouldn't know how to describe it. I'm not knowledgeable enough. But in social sciences, I think the way research was done had sort of evolved out of, I feel like saying, the Middle Ages, out of, the traditional universities of Bologna, Salamanca, La Sorbonne, these kinds of places, and where you became a respected academic because you sort of knew everything on a topic, and you could sort of position things relative to each other. You had a very broad sort of body of knowledge, more than creating. I think the implicit notion was that this was not a field that could lend itself to experiments, and sort of you didn't test things like you did in hard sciences. And then I think systems tend to sort of, there's a lot of momentum in how systems function. And the only, I mean, in continental Europe, at least, one of the only schools that sort of did research the US way, and I'm going to say the US, but obviously it's broader than that, was Insead. And even Insead came to that, I would argue, maybe in the late 60s, probably. I think HEC sort of came to it because they were so close to Insead, and so there was a bit of a, sort of both bewilderment and sort of interest in what was going on. And then we started going to conferences. My first conference was the SMS in Singapore, which was an interesting event. And SMS in those days was trying, I think, to make strategy. So I guess maybe I'm in the wrong place right now, but I think of myself more as a strategy scholar than really as an IB scholar. I think in Europe, it's very difficult to do strategy without it having an international component to it, unless you look at very, very small industries or very local industries. But I mean, even in a country like France or Germany, you've, if not covered the country pretty fast, but you drive a few hours and you're out of the country. So I think firms actually didn't think, or I think going back even quite a while, I think it was more spontaneous, natural, obvious for companies to try to do business in different countries. So
actually, you're right. It is more correct to say pure strategy research And then there is, management research, which is also international. And I want to ask you about what are the next 5 to 10 years? But what's the next big question? Or what are the understudied areas, especially with the international focus? It can be international entrepreneurship, international strategic management, from any kind of perspective.
So I think there still is a long way to go in really understanding sort of how companies can either reproduce or recreate the success that they've had in their proximate sort of market.
Mm-hmm.
I won't call it domestic necessarily. And I think, there's all this discussion in strategy about what is competitive advantage. Does the notion really exist? And I think I share in a lot of these doubts. And I don't mean doubt as questioning prior, I'm not sure we could call it findings, but prior conceptualizations. But it's more, many companies actually not only survive, but do reasonably well without necessarily having a competitive advantage. And it's not because competition doesn't happen, but it's so. And I think if you add to that this idea of going abroad, it sort of makes the mystery even bigger. You see companies not doing that well at home and actually getting their big break sort of in foreign markets sometimes. I guess we've probably all taught the Honda case. So Honda, at least the story was that Honda wasn't doing too well in Japan, and then actually was very successful in foreign markets. And I don't think we understand sort of these mechanisms very well. And I think it is this question of where does success come from? And in particular, if you add this sort of multiple markets dimension to it, that I think add to the
Mm-hmm.
to the mystery.
About creativity and coming up with these creative ideas. How does one do that? How do you come up with a great idea, great paper? How do you defend it? How do you sell the idea?
Well, I think, interestingly enough, I think some of the most creative ideas are questioning what we find obvious. And so, it's obvious to everyone that the world is flat. And questioning that, I think, is extremely creative. And I know this is far from management, but I think someone like Coase asking this question, but why do firms exist, is in the same sort of realm as questioning the fact that the earth is flat. It's everybody would actually try, if we try it with our students, just the look on their face suggests that you've gone mad if they haven't read Coase or know of Coase. So you say, but why do firms exist? It's like, what's happened to him? And it takes a lot of effort to sort of argue that, when we discuss firms, there is a question, which is why do firms emerge as a way to operate or to undertake economic activity? Why do we need somewhat stable organizations, and on and on? And I'm not saying transaction cost is the only way to explain it, but I think that kind of question is what I find the most creative, innovative, and sort of gets me thinking a lot.
Actually, you're right. I mean, people normally treat theory of the firm as a main strategy seminar, right? But actually, theory of the firm is quite international in its essence.
Yes.
And I want to ask you about, for the sake of time, about advice and mentoring. What was the best advice you received when you were going through the process? It was a quite different process for you, but what was the best
Yes.
advice you received?
I don't know if this will answer the question, but it was actually advice to try to get your teaching done well. That if you could teach well, it freed up your mind for all sorts of other things. And I think I tend to agree with that. I think in business schools today, teaching is seen as sort of a time-consuming obligation that we do, I mean, in part for the students, but we don't want it to take up too much of our time, which I think makes sense. We should keep time for doing research. But I think if you can teach well, it is a source of ideas, of discussions. It's a way to test ideas. And actually, interestingly enough, I think that it's one of the best ways to move around in the world. So through teaching, I've had opportunities in the US, I've had opportunities in China, I've had opportunities in India, and these opportunities in some cases have led to research projects. In others, they haven't, but I do think that there is this piece of advice. I owe it to one of the people who invited me to Michigan at the very beginning, Anil Karnani. And he said, you know, just put in a lot of energy and your teaching will go fine. And once your teaching is fine, everything else opens up. And I thought, I think that's a very good piece of advice, actually.
Interesting.
It's a way to get something sort of off the table, not off the table in the sense that you don't care anymore, but it's no longer a chore. It's no longer a concern. It's no longer an issue. And I tend to agree. I think it helps a lot. So I'm very grateful to Anil for that piece of advice.
Thank you. About the common mistakes, common pitfalls that you see in junior faculty or PhD students, what are the major issues that you see common across young scholars?
I think getting, it's difficult to say because I disagree with 50% of what I'm going to say, but I think it's focusing too much on a particular issue, question, topic, area. I think sort of it's very important to focus, but I think also being able to sort of put this element of research or this object of research in a much bigger picture, I think is a major, it is a way to look at it differently, to rethink it. And I think this change of focus is a very important part of the job we do. And I think it's very difficult to do at the beginning because sort of there's just so much to learn and know. And I guess the more I go, the more I know I don't know. And I think knowing you don't know is clearly a big step forward to sort of not even being aware you don't know of things. And that's why I think it's a common mistake, because until you've accumulated enough sort of awareness of what's around, it's very difficult to depart from the particular focus of our own research. So I do think keeping an open mind, doing different things, being interested in topics that have nothing to do with what we do is potentially interesting. Unfortunately, time is a big limit, but the good thing of this job is we choose to allocate our time the way we want, whereas in most other jobs, we have much less freedom to allocate
But I
time.
mean, I see what you're saying, and in some seminars or colloquiums, there's for example, a strategy paper being presented, and the OBHR colleagues say, "Oh, this is not my area. I don't need to listen. I don't want to listen." They don't even come, or their comments are, "Oh, this is not my area." But actually, it's not like it's management. You do expect them to know something because you've taken these seminars together when you're going through the PhD program. It's a different mentality. You're representing, you're giving a different perspective, which is very interesting and valuable. For the sake of time, Pierre,
Actually, I would pursue that, which I think part of the development of the field has led us to sort of slice what makes organizations operate smoothly, and if they're, I guess, for-profit firms, what make firms perform well. We have sort of sliced it in a way that to some extent mimics the way in which firms themselves tended to be organized in the old days. And I do think there's a bit of a limit about this. Just the kind of research we do, in some fields we formulate hypotheses, in others it is not considered necessary to formulate hypotheses. And it's unclear sort of why these differences are justified. In my view, they're not necessarily justified, but they very rarely get questioned. And I think on the other hand, if a school tried to do things differently, it probably would end up being marginalized just because sort of the institutional environment is such that it's very difficult to depart from these ways of viewing things. It would take a major crisis, I think.
Like the pandemic?
I don't know. The pandemic might lead. I don't know how business schools will emerge from the pandemic. We'll see.
It's going to be a good natural experiment because it's almost impossible to justify a $5,000 conference now for travel, and the dean is going to say, "Why don't you do Zoom?" to say
Sure.
something. So we will see. We'll see. It's going to be interesting. For the sake of time, what is one question that I should have asked you but haven't?
Oh, you ask all the right questions. I don't. I can't think of any that. I can't think of anything on which my point of view needs to be heard in a very big way. So I think whatever your interests are should guide your questions.
Thank you so much, Pierre. I enjoyed this conversation. I learned a lot. I'm sure the audience will agree with me. Thank you.
Well, I guess I feel a little bit like, as you can tell, my own sort of evolution in the field has been somewhat unconventional, and I don't think I'm certainly my contributions can't even measure up to the ones of most of your other guests, and I can't help but think that maybe you made a mistake in picking me rather than all the other people that I can think of. So thank you in any case. It was a pleasure. I don't think we'd ever had a conversation. We bumped into each other at conferences. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity to have what I think was a very pleasant chat for me. So thank you.
The last comments were about the lesson in humility. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you.